The unfolding sky. The hum of the city had always been my lullaby, a distant, comforting thrum against the quiet pulse of my own existence. I was Alara, a name that felt almost too grand for the small, intricate worlds I crafted on canvas and paper. My apartment, a sun-drenched nook tucked away on the third floor of an old brick building, was my sanctuary. It smelled of turpentine, fresh coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of lilies I always kept by the window. Here, I was safe. Here, I was whole. I spent my days translating the quiet beauty of forgotten corners and fleeting emotions into brushstrokes, believing that true art lay in capturing the unspoken. I hadn't known then that some emotions were better left unspoken, that some beauty came with an agonizing price. The invitation to the Everhart Gallery's Emerging Artist Showcase had been a dizzying blend of triumph and terror. My piece, Echoes of Dawn, a sprawling canvas depicting a city waking, bathed in the ethereal glow of first light, was my heart laid bare. It was a testament to the solitude I cherished, the quiet hope I nurtured. Standing amidst the polite murmurs and clinking glasses of the opening night, I felt like a fragile porcelain doll placed on a bustling market stall. My eyes darted around, searching for a friendly face, a familiar anchor in a sea of strangers who all seemed impossibly sophisticated, impossibly assured. Then I saw him. He wasn't merely walking, he was a force of nature moving through the crowd, a magnetic pull that seemed to warp the very air around him. Julian Thorne. The name was already legend in my city, synonymous with architectural brilliance and an old money lineage that whispered of power and influence. He was taller than I'd imagined, with a lean, athletic grace that belied the tailored precision of his dark suit. His hair, a rich espresso brown, was expertly styled, and his eyes were the color of the deepest ocean, intelligent and intense, and when they locked onto mine across the crowded room, my breath hitched. He moved towards my painting, not me, and for a moment, a foolish, selfish pang of disappointment flared. He stood before Echoes of Dawn, his head tilted slightly, a contemplative furrow between his brows. I watched him, mesmerized, a strange warmth spreading through my chest. He wasn't just looking, he was seeing. He saw the subtle hints of melancholy in the urban sprawl, the tenacious hope in the rising sun. A slow, breathtaking smile bloomed on his face, a genuine, unforced expression that transformed his sculpted features, softening the sharp edges. Then he turned, his gaze finding mine again, and the world tilted. "Remarkable," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through me. "It's as if you've bottled the precise moment when the world holds its breath, just before it remembers to start rushing again." My cheeks flushed, a heat that spread all the way to my scalp. No one had ever articulated my artistic intention with such piercing accuracy. "Thank you," I managed, my voice a mere whisper against the gallery din. "Julian Thorne," he offered, extending a hand that was warm and firm, his touch sending a jolt through me that felt both electric and profoundly grounding. Ilara Vance. My name felt small and insignificant on my tongue compared to his, yet he held my hand a fraction of a second longer than polite society dictated, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. It was a fleeting gesture, but it felt like a promise. From that moment, time ceased to exist in linear progression. It became a series of breathtaking leaps, each one propelling me deeper into his orbit. Our first proper conversation, later that evening, stretched into the early hours, fueled by cheap champagne and an inexplicable connection that felt ancient, faded. We talked about art, about life, about dreams and fears. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made me feel like the most fascinating person he had ever encountered. My quiet, solitary world, once so comforting, suddenly felt a little less complete without his presence. He introduced me to a world I'd only glimpsed from afar: hushed dinner parties and grand brownstones, exhilarating debates about urban renewal, weekends spent walking through sprawling estates that felt plucked from a different century. Yet he never made me feel out of place. With Julian, I was always enough, more than enough. He celebrated my art, commissioning a piece for his own apartment, not just as a patron, but as someone who genuinely understood the language of my soul. "You see beauty where others see decay, Ilara," he told me one evening, his eyes alight as he watched me sketch in a forgotten park. "You bring light to the shadows. That's a rare and precious gift." His words became my oxygen, his admiration, my sun. I hadn't realized how much I'd craved validation until it poured over me from Julian, a golden, intoxicating shower. Every shared glance, every lingering touch, every late-night confession woven itself into the fabric of my being. I felt a transformation, a shedding of my old, timid skin. I was no longer just Ilara, the artist who found solace in solitude. I was Ilara, Julian's Ilara, the woman who could make him smile, the woman he chose. And it felt like the most extraordinary thing in the world. My days began and ended with thoughts of him. A text message from him would send a thrill through me. A meeting would fill me with an eager anticipation that bordered on feverish. I found myself checking my phone constantly, waiting for his name to light up the screen. When he was with me, a profound peace settled over me, a sense of belonging I had never known. When he was away, a subtle anxiety would creep in, a hollow ache that only his return could fill. I dismissed it as the natural intensity of new love, a testament to the depth of our connection. We were two halves, finally whole, or so I believed. It was barely 3 months into our whirlwind romance when Julian invited me to meet his family. "They're eager to finally put a face to the name I can't stop talking about," he'd said, his smile warm and reassuring. But even then, a tiny tremor of unease snaked its way into my heart. I knew of the Thorns, their formidable presence in the city's upper echelons. Julian had always downplayed their influence, their expectations, but I wasn't blind. My modest upbringing, my freelance artist career, it was a world away from theirs. The Thorn estate was less a house and more a monument to old money and impeccable taste. A sweeping driveway, manicured lawns, a fountain that whispered secrets of centuries past. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the uncomfortable awareness of my simple dress, my sensible shoes, my beating heart thrumming too loudly. Julian's mother, Eleanor Thorn, greeted us at the grand entrance. She was a woman carved from ice and diamonds, regal and perfectly poised, her silver hair coiled into an elegant chignon. Her smile, when it came, was a cool, thin line that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ilara," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you." The words were polite, almost faultless, yet they carried the subtle weight of a judgment already made. Her gaze swept over me, lingering for a fraction too long on my hands, which I instinctively clasped together. His father, Arthur, was a towering figure, with a gaze that seemed to dissect rather than observe. He offered a curt nod, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Julian tells us you're an artist." It wasn't a question, but a pronouncement, delivered with a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Pity? Scorn? The dinner was an agonizing ballet of impeccable manners and veiled condescension. Julian tried to bridge the chasm, talking animatedly about my work, my insights, the way I saw the world, but his words seemed to bounce off a silent, invisible wall. Eleanor steered the conversation towards their family history, their philanthropic endeavors, the illustrious careers of Julian's siblings. Each anecdote felt like a subtle reminder of where I didn't belong, what I wasn't. "You know, Julian," Eleanor remarked, her gaze fixed on him, not me. We've always envisioned you with someone who truly understands the responsibilities that come with your position, someone who shares your world, your values. The implication hung heavy in the air, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me. Julian, bless his heart, reached for my hand under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine, a silent gesture of defiance, of reassurance. But even his touch couldn't fully dispel the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I felt a strange knot form in my stomach, a cold, hard stone of insecurity. It wasn't just dislike, it was a profound disapproval, a conviction that I was fundamentally unworthy. That night, back in Julian's city apartment, a place that now felt like a refuge rather than a temporary stop, I clung to him. "They don't like me, Julian," I whispered into his shoulder, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "They think I'm not good enough." He held me tighter, his breath warm against my hair. "Don't be ridiculous, my love. They just need time. They're very protective. They'll come around." But his words, though meant to comfort, felt like a flimsy shield against the cold, hard truth. I saw the shadow of doubt in his own eyes, a flicker of conflict he tried to hide. And in that moment, a new, terrifying emotion stirred within me. Fear. Fear of losing him. Fear of not being strong enough. Fear of not being enough for his world, for his family. The thought, once a distant possibility, now felt like a visceral threat.
My carefully constructed sense of self began to fray at the edges, replaced by an urgent, desperate need to prove my worth, not just to his family, but to myself, through him. He was not just my love. He was becoming my entire world, the only lens through which I could measure my own value. And I didn't even see it happening. I only felt the dizzying, terrifying thrill of being utterly consumed. The chill from that dinner lingered, a subtle but pervasive frost that settled deep into my bones. Julian's arms around me that night were a balm, his reassurances a fragile shield, but I could feel the cracks forming beneath my skin. He said they needed time, that they were protective, but my artist's eye, honed to perceive the unspoken, saw something far more profound in Eleanor and Arthur's gazes, an unwavering conviction that I was simply wrong, a misstep, an anomaly that needed to be corrected. And Julian, my steadfast Julian, in the quiet moments after his words of comfort, I saw the weariness etched around his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. He was caught, I realized, between the world he knew and the woman he loved, and the terrifying thought that he might eventually choose the former began to take root in my heart, a parasitic fear that slowly, insidiously, began to consume me. My studio, once a haven of vibrant colors and quiet creativity, slowly transformed into a waiting room. My brushes lay idle, my canvases starkly white, reflecting not my inner world, but the echoing emptiness of Julian's absence. I found myself staring at my phone, willing his name to appear, a Pavlovian response to the dopamine rush of his texts. Each notification was a lifeline, each call a breath of fresh air. Without them, the air grew thin, stagnant, and a creeping anxiety would curl in my stomach, whispering doubts and insecurities. Eleanor Thorne, though rarely engaging with me directly, became a formidable presence in my life. Her calls to Julian, always impeccably timed, seemed to punctuate our evenings. "Darling," she'd coo through the phone, her voice carrying an almost saccharine sweetness that grated on my nerves. "Aunt Beatrice is hosting her annual charity gala. You simply must attend. The Vanderbilts will be there, and you know how keen your father is to finalize that waterfront development deal with them." The implication was never explicit, but always clear. These were their events, their world, and I, Elara Vance, the artist from the modest apartment, was not a part of it. Julian, bless his heart, would try. "Mother, Elara and I had plans that evening,
but the steel in Eleanor's voice would harden. "Julian, darling, this is important. For the family, for your career." And a flicker of something, guilt, obligation, would cross Julian's face. He'd look at me, a silent apology in his eyes, and I, desperate to ease his burden, desperate to be understanding, would smile weakly. "It's okay, Julian. Go. I understand." But inside, a tiny piece of me would splinter. Each time he left for one of these family obligations, the silence in my apartment felt louder, more oppressive. I would trace the lines of his commissioned painting, City's Embrace, which now hung above my sofa, a paradox of comfort and longing. He had wanted it for his apartment, but I had refused, claiming it still needed finishing touches, a flimsy excuse to keep a tangible piece of him with me. Now, its vibrant hues mocked my monochrome existence. My world had shrunk, contracting until it was little more than the space between Julian and myself. My identity as an artist, once so central, felt like a quaint hobby, something secondary to my new, all-consuming role, Julian's girlfriend, constantly striving for acceptance. I started to scrutinize myself, my choices, through the imagined lens of Eleanor Thorne. Was my hair too messy? Was my dress not formal enough? Should I be more interested in philanthropy, in investments, in anything beyond the raw, honest expression of art? I began to research the Thorne family's history, their social circles, their expectations, trying to decipher the unwritten rules of their world, convinced that if I could just fit in, if I could just be what they wanted, then Julian would be spared this conflict, and I would finally be worthy. The insidious nature of their disapproval was its subtlety. It wasn't overt cruelty, but a constant, gentle chipping away at my confidence, masked by polite smiles and well-meaning advice. One afternoon, Eleanor invited me for tea at their city club, a rare, almost shocking invitation. I arrived, heart hammering, dressed in the most elegant outfit I owned. "Ilara," she began, setting down her porcelain cup with a delicate clink. "Julian is a remarkable young man. He has a brilliant future ahead of him."
And with that comes certain responsibilities. Her gaze, as always, was unnervingly direct. He needs a partner who can truly stand by his side, shoulder to shoulder, in all facets of our world with grace and confidence. She paused, then offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Your art, while charming, is rather niche, wouldn't you say? Perhaps you might consider a more stable path, something that offers more security? For your future, of course." The words, delivered with such practiced elegance, were a poisoned dart, hitting their mark with devastating precision. Niche. Charming. Not stable. It wasn't just a critique of my career, it was a dismissal of my very essence. My passion, my voice, reduced to a pleasant diversion, inadequate for the weight of Julian Thorne's world. I felt a cold wave wash over me, a chilling confirmation of my deepest fears. I was not enough. I would never be enough. I managed a strained smile, a polite murmur about my love for my work, but the resolve in my voice was fractured. The desire to prove her wrong warred with a crushing sense of inadequacy. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was holding Julian back. Maybe he did deserve someone better, someone who effortlessly belonged in his world. The fear of abandonment grew into a monstrous shadow, looming over every interaction. If Julian was late for a call, my mind conjured elaborate scenarios. Had he met someone else? Was his family finally convincing him to leave me? Every female colleague he mentioned, every old friend from his elite university, became a potential threat, a suitable alternative the Thornes would undoubtedly prefer. I began to ask him about his day with an almost desperate intensity, needing to know every detail, every minute he spent away from me. "Who was at that meeting, love? What did your mother say? Did you run into anyone familiar?" My questions, once born of genuine interest,
now carried an undertone of suspicion, a desperate need for control. Julian, ever patient, would answer, though I noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor, a slight hesitance before he spoke, a careful choice of words. He was trying to protect me, I knew, but in doing so, he created a new distance, a new space for my anxieties to fester. The closeness we once shared, the easy, open honesty, was slowly being eroded by the pressure. One evening, Julian came over, looking exhausted.
He'd spent the entire day with his father, touring a new development site, followed by a family dinner that I hadn't been invited to. "They're really pushing for me to consider a merger with the Sterling Group," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Arthur thinks it's the next logical step for the company." "And you?" I asked, my voice thin. "What do you think, Julian?" He sighed, sinking onto the sofa beside me, pulling me into his side. "It's complicated. There are advantages, of course, but also compromises I'm not sure I'm willing to make." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push, too afraid of what I might hear. Instead, I focused on the palpable tension emanating from him, the weariness in his eyes. Later, as we lay in bed, the city lights painting muted patterns on the ceiling, I whispered, "Julian, do you ever wish things were simpler? That you didn't have to choose?" He stiffened beside me. "Ilara, there's no choice. There's only you. Don't you know that?" His voice was low, laced with a familiar tenderness, but it didn't quite reach the hollow space in my chest. He held me tighter, but it felt less like embrace and more like a desperate attempt to hold on to something that was slipping away, not just from him, but from me. I believed him, or I desperately wanted to believe him, but the fear had taken root too deeply. Every affectionate gesture, every loving word from Julian was immediately shadowed by the thought, how long can this last? How much more pressure can he take? I was losing myself, piece by agonizing piece, dissolving into a desperate need for his love, his presence, his validation. My joy was entirely dependent on his happiness, my peace on his reassurance. The vibrant, independent artist who once painted the echoes of dawn now felt like a pale imitation, a ghost of her former self, lost in the overwhelming, terrifying storm of a love that had become less about connection and more about desperate survival. I was drowning, and the only hand I saw to grasp was Julian's, even if it meant pulling us both under.
My inner monologue, once a quiet symphony of artistic ideas, had devolved into a frantic, incessant interrogation. Where is he? Is he thinking of me? Is his mother with him? Is she talking about me? What are they saying? My art, my anchor, had become a distant memory. I couldn't focus. The canvas felt alien, the colors muted, the inspiration a dried-up well. How could I create beauty when my own world felt so ugly, so fractured? My identity, once so firmly rooted in my passion, was now entirely intertwined with Julian. I wasn't Alara the artist. I was Alara, Julian's girlfriend, and the weight of that definition was crushing. The jealousy, once a fleeting prickle of insecurity, blossomed into a thorny, venomous vine. Every mention of a female colleague, every polite interaction Julian had with another woman at social events, which I still occasionally attended, feeling like an imposter in borrowed clothes, sent a searing jolt of fear through me. My heart would hammer, my palms would sweat, and a cold dread would seize me. They're more suited. They belong. She understands his world better than I ever could. I knew it was irrational, knew it was unfair to Julian, but the fear was a living thing, clawing at my insides, whispering poison into my ear. I started to check his phone when he was in the shower, a shameful act that left me trembling with guilt and self-loathing. But the compulsion was too strong. I needed proof, needed reassurance. I'd scan his messages, his call logs, searching for any hint of betrayal, any sign that his loyalty was wavering. I never found anything, of course, other than mundane work emails and loving messages from him to me, but the act itself left a bitter taste in my mouth, a further erosion of my self-respect. Julian, sensing my increasing anxiety, tried harder to reassure me. He'd bring me flowers, plan quiet dinners, whisper promises of forever. But his reassurances, meant to soothe, only fed the monster of my insecurity. He's trying too hard. He's feeling guilty. He's preparing me for the inevitable. The cycle was relentless. Fear, desperate need for reassurance, temporary calm, then renewed, heightened fear. One particularly harsh winter evening, after a week where Julian had been almost entirely consumed by a major Thorn Industries bid, he arrived at my apartment looking utterly drained. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. He barely managed to smile, pulling me into a weak embrace.
"I'm so sorry, Alara," he murmured into my hair. "It's been hell. My father is relentless. He practically moved into my office." I wanted to comfort him, to be the strong, supportive partner he deserved, but the fear, the crushing need, was too overwhelming. "You were supposed to call," I heard myself say, my voice tight, accusing. "You said you would call last night. I waited up for hours." He pulled back, a flicker of exasperation crossing his face before he masked it. "Alara, I was in meetings until 2 a.m. I barely slept. I was trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal that my family's future hinges on. I didn't have a spare second." "But you could have sent a text," I countered, the words tumbling out, laced with a desperation I couldn't control. "Just to let me know you were okay, to let me know you hadn't forgotten about me." He stared at me, his ocean eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite decipher. Frustration? Disappointment? "Forgotten about you? Alara, how could you even think that? You're everything to me, but I'm under immense pressure here. My family, they're making it very difficult." His family. Always his family. The words were a trigger. "Yes, your family," I spat, a bitter laugh escaping me. "The people who think I'm not good enough. The people who want to break us apart. Are they succeeding, Julian? Are they finally wearing you down? Is that why you forget to call?" The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. Julian's jaw tightened. "That's an incredibly unfair thing to say, Alara." "Is it?" I challenged, tears stinging my eyes, blurring his beloved face. "Or is it the truth? Am I just a burden to you? Am I making your life harder?" He closed his eyes for a moment,
a deep sigh escaping him. When he opened them, the tenderness was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. You're not a burden, Alara, but this constant questioning, the doubt, it's exhausting. I need your support, not your suspicion. His words, though quietly spoken, struck me like a physical blow. Suspicion. The word echoed in my head, a damning indictment. He was right. I was suffocating him, stifling the very love I so desperately clung to. But the fear of losing him, of being utterly alone, was a vortex pulling me deeper. I just love you so much, Julian, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a desperate, childish plea. I can't imagine a life without you.
Please don't ever leave me. He pulled me into a hug, but it felt different this time, less like a passionate embrace and more like a weary obligation. His hand stroked my hair, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the distance in his touch. I won't, he murmured, but the conviction in his voice felt hollow. He was tired. I was making him tired. That night, alone in my apartment after Julian had left, citing an early morning meeting, the self-blame began its relentless assault. You're driving him away. You're too needy. You're not strong enough. You're not enough. Eleanor's words, "He needs a partner who can truly stand by his side," echoed with chilling clarity. I wasn't standing by him. I was clinging to him, dragging him down with my anxieties. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, seeing a woman I barely recognized. The vibrant spark in my eyes, once so clear, was dimmed by shadows of fear and desperation. My shoulders, once proud, were hunched. The independent spirit that defined Alara Vance, the artist, had been eroded, replaced by an anxious, emotionally dependent shell. I was losing myself, and the terrifying realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I was becoming everything I feared, a woman defined solely by her relationship, utterly lost without it. The next few weeks were a painful charade. Jillian and I continued to see each other, but the easy intimacy had vanished. Our conversations were carefully navigated, avoiding any topic that might trigger my insecurities or his frustration. We were like two people walking on eggshells, each afraid of shattering the fragile piece. He was growing quieter, more reserved, retreating into himself. I, in turn, became more desperate for his attention, more prone to emotional outbursts, followed by agonizing apologies. One afternoon, I was browsing an online art forum, something I hadn't done in months, when I stumbled upon a review of Echoes of Dawn from the Everhart Gallery showcase. It was glowing, praising its emotional depth, its raw honesty. A triumph of introspection and quiet strength, the critic wrote. Quiet strength. The words felt like a cruel joke. Where was that strength now? Where was that introspection? I was a whirlwind of external validation, my internal world a chaotic mess. I closed the laptop, my gaze drifting to the blank canvas on my easel. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. This was who I was, who I used to be. An artist, a creator.
A woman with her own voice, her own vision. But somewhere along the way, in my desperate scramble for Julian's love and his family's acceptance, I had silenced that voice, blurred that vision. I had traded my independence for dependence, my self-respect for a desperate longing. The realization was a bitter pill, but also, surprisingly, a small, faint spark, a tiny flicker of the old Alara, deep within the wreckage. I needed to find her again, not for Julian, not for his family, but for myself. The thought was terrifying, daunting, but for the first time in months, it wasn't about him. It was about me. And in that small, fragile shift, a seed of something new, something hopeful, began to stir. The relationship, once my sole source of joy, had become my cage, and I, for the first time, truly saw the bars. Part 4. The realization, born from the quiet shame of my actions and the memory of my lost artistic self, was a cold splash of water to my face. It hurt, exquisitely so, to acknowledge the depths of my emotional dependence, the way I had willingly, albeit unconsciously, sacrificed my identity on the altar of a love that had become toxic. The silence of my studio, once oppressive, now felt like an invitation to listen to the whispers of the woman I used to be, the artist buried beneath layers of insecurity and fear. It began subtly. I started small, tidying my studio, arranging my paints, sharpening my pencils. Mundane tasks, yes, but each deliberate movement felt like a reclamation, a gentle clearing of the debris that had accumulated in my inner world. I didn't pick up a brush immediately. The thoughts still felt too daunting, too heavy with the weight of expectation and past failures. Instead, I started writing in a journal, something I hadn't done since college. I poured out all the ugly truths, the jealousy, the fear of abandonment, the self-blame, the constant need for Julian's validation. Seeing the words on paper, raw and unfiltered, was like lancing a wound, painful but necessary for healing. Julian, sensing a shift, though perhaps not understanding its origin, grew concerned. He noticed my quiet introspection, the way I sometimes pulled away from his attempts at reassurance, not out of anger, but out of a newfound need for space. "Ilara, are you okay?" he'd ask, his brows furrowed with worry. "You seem distant." "I'm just thinking," I'd reply, truthfully, "about things, about us, about me." The vulnerability of those conversations was terrifying. It meant confronting the uncomfortable truths I'd so desperately tried to ignore. It meant acknowledging that our relationship, once a source of pure joy, had become a crucible, burning away my essence. But facing it, truly facing it, also brought a strange sense of liberation. I started to set small boundaries. When Julian's mother called him in the middle of our dinner, I would encourage him to step outside to take it, rather than listening to the veiled disapproval in her voice. When he tried to smooth over his family's criticisms, I would gently but firmly tell him, "Julian, I need you to understand that their words hurt me. It's not okay for them to treat me like that, and it's not okay for you to minimize it." These conversations were difficult. Julian, unaccustomed to me challenging him or his family so directly, initially reacted with confusion, then a touch of defensiveness. "But Ilara, they're just worried about me," he'd say, a familiar plea in his voice. "I understand their worry," I'd respond, my voice trembling but steady. "But their worry shouldn't come at the cost of my dignity or our relationship. Your loyalty to your family shouldn't come at the cost of your loyalty to me." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. It was the first time I had articulated that fear, that core insecurity about his divided loyalties. And seeing the sudden understanding in his eyes, the flicker of pain, was both heartbreaking and empowering. He was beginning to see the full extent of the emotional toll his family's interference was taking on me and on us. Slowly, tentatively, I returned to my art. I didn't aim for grandeur, just for honesty. I started sketching, not the cityscapes I was known for, but abstract representations of my emotional landscape, the tangled knots of fear, the jagged edges of insecurity, the faint, hopeful glimmers of self-discovery. The process was cathartic, a visual language for the turmoil within. It was a private act, a communion with myself, and in its quiet solitude, I found a piece of my lost identity. One afternoon, Julian found me in my studio, surrounded by my sketches. He picked up one, a swirling vortex of dark colors with a tiny, defiant streak of gold at its center. "What is this?" he asked, his voice soft, intrigued. "My fear," I admitted,
my gaze fixed on the drawing and the hope that's trying to break through.
He looked at me, really looked at me, with an intensity I hadn't seen in his eyes for months. "Ilara," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I haven't been fair to you. I've let my family's expectations dictate too much. I've been so focused on trying to manage them, trying to protect you from them, that I haven't protected us. I haven't truly stood up for you, for us. I'm so sorry." His apology, genuine and heartfelt, was a dam breaking. Tears streams down my face, not of sadness, but of relief, of a long-held pain finally acknowledged. "I know it's hard, Julian," I managed, my voice choked. "But I need you to fight for us. I need you to choose us, unequivocally." He knelt before me, taking my hands in his. "I do choose you, Ilara. Always. I didn't know how. I didn't realize how deeply their disapproval was affecting you, affecting us. I was so caught up in the pressure, I lost sight of what mattered most." In that moment, I saw the true Julian, stripped bare of his family's expectations, vulnerable and earnest, the man I had fallen in love with, not the one I had feared losing. It wasn't an instant fix, not a magical erasure of all our problems, but it was a pivotal turning point, a crack in the wall of our dysfunction, allowing light to seep in. I continued my journey of self-reclamation. I started taking long walks through the city, revisiting the spots that had once inspired my art. I reconnected with old friends, artists and creatives who had understood and celebrated my independent spirit. I even started taking commissions again, small ones at first, feeling the familiar joy of bringing beauty into the world, on my own terms. The fear of abandonment hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer held me captive. I understood now that my worth wasn't contingent on Julian's presence or his family's approval. My worth was inherent, an intrinsic part of who I was, Ilara Vance, the artist, the woman who found quiet strength in the echoes of dawn. Julian, true to his word, began to change. He started to draw clearer lines with his family. He declined invitations that excluded me. He openly challenged his mother's barbed comments, not with anger, but with a quiet, unwavering resolve. "Mother," I once overheard him say on the phone, his voice firm, "Ilara is my partner. If you cannot treat her with the respect she deserves, then we cannot continue this conversation." It was a moment of profound courage, a testament to his own growth, his willingness to stand up for our love. His family's reaction was predictable. Eleanor was furious, Arthur distant and cold. The pressure escalated. They spoke of disinheritance, of ruining his reputation, of betraying his legacy. Julian would come to me, looking strained, but now, instead of collapsing into despair, he'd find strength in my newfound resilience. "It's getting worse, Ilara," he admitted one evening, running a hand through his hair. "They're threatening to cut me off, financially, professionally. They've made it clear, it's them or you." My heart ached for him, for the impossible position he was in. But instead of spiraling into fear, a surprising calm settled over me. I looked at the man I loved, this man who was fighting for us, who was willing to risk everything for our future. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was worth fighting for, and that I, Ilara Vance, was worthy of that fight. "Then we fight, Julian," I said, my voice clear and strong, meeting his gaze with an unwavering resolve that surprised even myself. "Together." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of quiet struggle, of buried fears finally confronted. It was a declaration, not just of love, but of self-respect, of shared strength. The stage was set, not just for a battle, but for a true emotional climax.
Part 5. Then we fight, Julian, I said, my voice clear and strong, meeting his gaze with an unwavering resolve that surprised even myself. Together. The words, simple yet profound, seemed to echo in the quiet of my studio, a declaration of war against the forces that sought to divide us, but more importantly, a declaration of faith in ourselves, in our love, and in the strength I had rediscovered within. The true test came a week later, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a meticulously planned family dinner at the Thorne estate, clearly an intervention orchestrated by Eleanor. The invitation had been pointedly issued to Julian alone, a calculated exclusion designed to remind me of my place. But Julian, no longer the conflicted man caught between two worlds, had firmly replied, "Alara will be joining me, mother, or neither of us will be attending." His voice, when he relayed this to me, held a new, steely edge that thrilled me to my core.
Walking up the familiar, sweeping driveway, I felt a familiar tremor of anxiety, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of defiant calm. My hand, nestled in Julian's, felt strong and secure. I wore a simple, elegant dress, chosen not to impress them, but to reflect the quiet confidence I now carried. This wasn't about proving my worth. It was about asserting it. Eleanor greeted us at the door, her face a mask of polite disapproval that barely concealed her irritation. "Julian, Alara," she acknowledged, her voice as sharp as cut glass. Arthur offered his usual curt nod, his eyes sweeping over me with a dismissive air. The grand dining room, filled with the hushed clinking of silverware and the scent of expensive food, felt charged with unspoken tension. Julian's siblings, his older brother Thomas and younger sister Clara, offered awkward smiles, caught in the uncomfortable crossfire. The meal began with Eleanor expertly steering the conversation towards Thorne Industries, Julian's bright future, and the unfortunate distractions that could derail it. Her words were aimed at Julian, but her gaze, like a cold, calculating laser, kept flicking to me, daring me to speak, daring me to react. Julian, sensing the insidious nature of her attack, placed his hand over mine under the table, a silent anchor. Then Eleanor turned directly to me, her smile thin. "Alara, dear, we're all very invested in Julian's well-being, and frankly, this situation has caused us considerable concern. Julian is a man destined for great things, and he needs a partner who can truly support that, someone who understands the demands and responsibilities of his position. Do you truly believe you are that person?" My heart hammered against my ribs, a familiar rush of adrenaline. The old Alara would have stammered, apologized, shrunk under the weight of her judgment. But the new Alara, the one who had confronted her fears and reclaimed her identity, felt a different kind of strength rise within her. I met Eleanor's gaze, my own steady and unwavering. "Eleanor," I began, my voice clear, calm, and surprisingly strong. "I love Julian, and I believe in him, not just in the man his family expects him to be, but in the man he truly is. My support for him comes not from a desire to fit into your world, but from a genuine understanding of his heart, his values, and his dreams." He doesn't need a partner who simply understands the demands of his position. He needs a partner who understands him. And that, I believe, is precisely what I offer. A collective gasp went around the table. Eleanor's eyes widened, her polished composure momentarily cracking. Arthur's jaw tightened. Julian squeezed my hand, a silent, powerful affirmation. "As for my own worth," I continued, feeling a surge of courage, "I am an artist. My work speaks to the quiet beauty and emotional truth of the human experience. It may not be the world you value, but it is a world of depth and integrity. I bring my own strength, my own perspective, and my own independent spirit to this relationship. I am not here to be an accessory or to be approved of. I am here because Julian and I choose each other, because our love is built on mutual respect,
shared dreams, and a connection that transcends social standing or inherited wealth. I paused, taking a breath, feeling the weight of my words hang in the air. Julian has every right to choose his own path, to define his own happiness, and if that happiness includes me, then it is not for anyone else to judge or oppose. Our relationship is not a situation to be managed, it is a partnership to be honored. The silence that followed was absolute, thick with the unyielding force of my conviction. Eleanor's face was a study in shock and fury. Arthur, for the first time, seemed truly taken aback. Then Julian stood, pulling me up beside him. His hand found the small of my back, a gesture of unwavering solidarity. "Alara is right," Julian said, his voice resonant, carrying the authority of a man who had finally found his own. "My choice is made. My happiness is with Alara. If that is a problem for any of you, then I understand, but I will not compromise on this. We are leaving." And with that, we turned, walking out of that grand dining room, away from the stony silence of his family, into the cold night air. The relief that washed over me was staggering, pure and exhilarating. I had spoken my truth, and Julian had stood by me, unequivocally. We were free. The immediate aftermath was as expected, tumultuous. Julian received a furious call from his father, threatening disinheritance, freezing his trust funds, cutting him off from Thorn Industries. It was a brutal blow, a complete severance from the life he had known. But instead of despair, there was a strange, liberating lightness in Julian.
"It's okay, Alara," he said, holding me close that night, the city lights twinkling outside his apartment window. "It hurts, yes, but it's also freeing. I've always wanted to build something of my own, something that truly reflects my vision, not just my father's legacy. Now I have to." And so we began to build our new life together, brick by brick, dream by dream. Julian started his own architectural firm, Thorn & Co., a subtle nod to his heritage, but with a distinct modern vision focused on sustainable, community-centric design. It was challenging starting from scratch, but his passion was infectious, his drive unyielding. I, in turn, found a renewed vigor in my art. My canvases, once filled with the turmoil of my inner world, now burst with vibrant colors, reflecting the joy, strength, and quiet confidence I had found. Echoes of Dawn was no longer just a painting. It was the story of my own awakening. My art flourished. I secured a new gallery exhibition, this time not as an emerging artist, but as an established voice, celebrated for my distinctive style and emotional depth. I painted a new piece, Shared Horizon, a diptych that captured the convergence of two separate journeys into a single, breathtaking future. It hung proudly in the new, sun-filled apartment Julian and I found together, a space that smelled not of old money or anxious waiting, but of fresh paint, shared meals, and unwavering love. Years passed. Julian's firm grew, garnering critical acclaim for its innovative designs. My art gained national recognition, with collectors seeking out my work. We built a life rooted in mutual respect, unwavering support, and an abiding love that had been forged in the fires of adversity. Our relationship was no longer defined by fear or desperation, but by a joyous, expansive partnership. We were two strong, independent individuals who chose to build a life together, not to complete each other, but to enrich each other. The Thorn family's opposition, once a formidable mountain, had gradually crumbled into irrelevance. Julian's siblings, Thomas and Clara, seeing his genuine happiness and undeniable success, slowly began to reconnect, tentatively at first, then with genuine warmth. Eleanor and Arthur remained distant for a long time, their pride unyielding. But then an unexpected letter arrived, a terse, formal invitation to a philanthropic event hosted by Thorn Industries, a
addressed to Mr. Julian Thorne and Miss Alara Vance.
It wasn't an apology, not an acceptance, but it was a crack in the wall, a grudging acknowledgement of Julian's path, and by extension, of me. Julian looked at me, a question in his eyes. I smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. We go, I said, because we choose to, not because we need their approval, but because we are strong enough to walk in our truth together. And we did. That evening, as we entered the grand ballroom, Julian's hand in mine, I felt no trace of the old insecurity. I was Alara Vance, the artist, the partner, the woman who had learned to love with self-respect, not desperation. Julian, beside me, was not just the heir to a legacy, but a man who had built his own, a man who had chosen love over expectation, authenticity over obligation. We met Eleanor's gaze across the room, and for the first time I saw not just judgment, but a flicker of something new, reluctant respect. Their opposition had not broken us, it had forged us. I looked at Julian, his eyes mirroring my own contentment, and a profound sense of peace settled over me. Our love story wasn't just about two people falling in love. It was about one woman finding herself, and in doing so, empowering her partner to find his true self too. It was a love that had demanded everything, shattered my old self, but ultimately rebuilt me, stronger, truer, and more beautifully whole than I had ever dared to imagine. The unfolding sky, once a symbol of endless uncertainty, now stretched before us, vast and full of boundless, shared possibility.